Hi everyone, welcome back to our symposium. It's good to see you here. And yeah, today we're here with Zoe Adjonyoh and Anna Sulan Masing. Thank you so much, Anna and Zoe, already for your time. Maybe you can wave quickly so we know who you are. Perfect. So Zoe and Anna are two of the founders of Black Book, which is a global representation platform for Black and non-white people working within hospitality and food media. I'm going to say just a few words on each of them. So Zoe is a chef, author, and food justice activist based in London. You may also know her as from her cookbook and her catering business, Zoe's Ghana Kitchen. And Anna is a food and drinks writer, an academic, and a poet based in London too. And she also has a project called Sourced, where she looks more into ingredients and their provenience. And Zoe already gave a talk at our symposium about 2 weeks ago, which was called Decolonizing the Food System, which was meant as a little kind of intro to some of the questions that arise from when you look at decolonization, as a framework for a new food system. So she shared some of the questions Black Book has been working on, and you can find the recording of this talk in our app. So that was a more kind of theoretical approach, and today we're going to find out more about how Zoe and Anna and Frankie, who is the third founder, started Black Book, and also what led them to this point. We're going to hear more about the steps they've taken to engage systemic change in the food industry. And then Anna is also going to share some thoughts on how language and narrative fits into these issues. So yeah, very excited to have this of Black Book meets die Gemeinschaft. Before we start, I'm just going to make a few info announcements. So Zoe and Anna are going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have 15 minutes for Q&A from you guys. If you want, you can, or we strongly encourage or invite you to turn on your camera, because otherwise, just to make it a bit more personal, even though it's online. Some of you are doing it already, which is fantastic. If you want to ask any questions, feel free to type them in the chat during the talk, or also to ask them directly in the end. For that, you can just turn on your video, or let us know in the chat that you have a question, and we will give you, we will turn on your microphone. This talk is also being recorded, and afterwards we will share the recording in our event app, as well as some additional resources and questions we have for you. And if you have any technical issues, you can write to me in the chat or to Frida. Hi, Frida, who's also called die Gemeinschaft. You can go on participants and click on the name of a person, and then you can send a direct message, which is also useful to know in case you want to chat with anyone directly who you see here. So I'm going to hand over the virtual mic to Zoe, who's going to start. Zoe, let me turn on your microphone.
Hi.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Perfect.
No drum roll? Hello, everybody. And my name is Zoe Adjonyoh, and thank you for the introduction. And yeah, thank you for attending this talk. So I'm going to start this with the point of origin, really, which is, like all good stories of problem solving, it starts with having a personal problem to solve that you think other people probably have a similar problem. And so that's where this story, the journey of Black Book, starts with the fact that as a chef and writer working in the UK food industry over the last 10 years, I kept coming across problems that I felt were based around race, also class. Some of those problems included a very low ceiling in terms of where my career could go, because I had been made the poster girl for Ghanaian food, and it was kind of very limiting and boxed in. The whole language and narrative around that was very much about, you know, people putting ideas of authenticity and tradition and kind of slamming those ideas on me and trying to make me fit into that specific bracket of what they wanted to talk about. The other problem was this kind of reductionism of what I was doing and other people like me, and calling, you know, the food we were making a trend, or the movement that was happening a trend, which I didn't like. And also my opposite experience somewhat in the United States, which was that I found myself, I can see Anne McBride's on the call. Hello, Anne. Anne McBride invited me to the Culinary Institute of America to cook amongst an amazing group of high profile chefs of color, mainly Black, who were all, you know, cooking at this amazing level and all in one space. And I'd never seen anything like that before, ever. And then I got an award for my contribution to the culinary world. I got an Iconoclast Award and cooked at James Beard House. And that was a similar experience where all of the chefs there were Black and people of color being spotlighted, being celebrated in a way that I hadn't seen in the UK. And on top of that, we had, I noticed organizations such as Radical Exchange in New Orleans, and Black Food Folks, and you know, the Iconoclast Dinner. Just, there were many more organizations existing to support non-white people in the food community. And I thought that the UK needed some of, or a bit of all of those things, really. And I kind of just held that for a while because I was busy, right? Being a chef, running a business, working full time. So I didn't do much with that until I took a sabbatical, and then decided, yeah, I want to do this. And then I sought out partners to help me do it. And those partners were Anna Sulan Masing, who's my co-founder, and also Frankie Reddin. So what does Black Book, what are we trying to do? What does it stand for? Well, you know, if in its most simplest form, it's a platform for promoting diversity in the food industry. You know, that isn't a new idea, obviously, but what might be new about that is that we want to do it on a global scale. So what we're interested in is a globally connected conversation around issues that we know to be the case around the world. Because even though I was looking at the US model and thinking, oh, look at all these Black chefs getting up to these different tiers in their career and different, like all these different modes of representation they were able to do. You know, the US model isn't without its own problems. And basically, you know, I approached Anna and Frankie and we started to plan what Black Book would look like, what's the mission statement and where we want it to go. And that was kind of a long tail view. However, in the midst of the pandemic and everything else that's going on, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement took up some force and speed. And there was a lot of white, I know that most of you in the room are white, so please don't take this personally, but there was a lot of white people in food media who were trying to borrow my Blackness for the purposes of either making them look good or inclusive, or as if they had something important to say on the issues of diversity and inclusion generally, and also just specifically in the food industry. And some of these people were people who ignored me, had been ignoring me for several years since they decided my trend and my moment was over. And also people who weren't very responsive to my claims on previous panels I'd been on when I brought up these conversations and these topics, that, you know, up until this sudden realization that I'm Black and my life matters. It's a very weird moment in my personal history. But I decided to cast all those requests aside, and I decided to create our own platform to talk about these issues, because who better than ourselves, obviously, to negotiate that conversation, to really get under the skin of what's wrong, and to also provide the solutions, because none of those people were ever placed to be involved in that conversation. So we sort of gathered ourselves and created a web series, a webinar called Decolonizing the Food Industry over 8 weeks. I used my network of amazing people who work in food, whether they're editors, writers, stylists, photographers, cooks, all of the different people I've met on my journey in food in the last 10 years from across the world. And I asked them to participate in this discussion, to have an open, and I also specifically chose people that I knew wouldn't be scared to, you know, show the mirror back at the world what's going on. And we had a very successful 8 weeks, and there was a lot of attention from the UK food media and industry on what we were doing. There's lots of people who work in food and hospitality in the UK praising us for creating that space and creating that platform to have their concerns aired, and that was fantastic. And we got under the skin of, you know, some good, like, deep issues. For example, some of the, I mean, Anna might speak to this in a bit more detail later, but some of the things we talked about were like, you know, publishing and recipe writing, and then the restrictions on writers there, or awards, and how Black people are never properly represented, or Black food talent is never properly represented in those kind of awards, existing systems. And, you know, we picked out lots of potential solutions that all seem to involve creating our own platforms rather than waiting for the industry to do the very necessary and hard, long work it had to do. And so where we are now is Black Book is this platform, as I say. How we operate is we have 4 pillars, which kind of are the grounding for everything that we do. And it's also important to note that we're more of a conduit for these things rather than expecting us individuals to be able to do all of these separate things. So we stand for raising visibility, increasing wealth creation, so people's long-term earning potential. We stand for equality, obviously, and we stand for, what's the last one, Anna? You're on mute. This is when those slides would have been handy, eh? So visibility, equity, wealth creation, and
equality. Oh, equity, equality, wealth creation, and visibility.
There you go. Sorry, guys. There are 4 pillars which kind of underpin everything that we're doing, and we have 3 modes by which we're trying to deliver that message. So we have this kind of thought leadership part of what we do, which is tied into consultancy and I guess partly a think tank around continuing to have these conversations in different ways on different platforms, whether it be continuing the Decol series, whether it be you know, dealing directly with companies and food businesses or brands that want to change or want to learn how to change and what they might do better. And then the second part of it is Black Book Academy, which is we've just recently registered as a charity for creating a mentorship and career development fund to support Black talent in food. And then we also have the third arm, which we are yet to launch, but soon, is a talent agency. So we're trying to create an ecosystem whereby we create community, foster conversation and inclusivity. Then for the people that need things that they're not getting from the industry right now, for whatever reason, we want to support them and help them build their careers in a meaningful way, in the way that they want to do, in a way that helps them navigate a white industry. And then the hope is through that incubation and accelerator program, we develop them to be able to represent them for talent. And we want that to happen globally. Again, so just to keep the conversation connected, to keep representation connected, and because we live in a global world, frankly. So that's what Black Book is, that's what we want to do, and that's what we're doing. And it's been received very well, you know, by the industry and by people who work in the industry. And I probably should leave it there so that Anna has something to say.
Thanks, Zoe. Yeah, so basically, I just wanted to talk a little bit further about the kind of content we have, or the sort of language that we're developing, touching off, two specific points that Zoe said. So this idea of the global space. Because when we talk about food, of course, food is part of a global network, trade systems, systems of knowledge. And as we mentioned, thought leadership is one of the big parts of what we're doing. So if we think about things in a global space, it's developing that language and knowing how to speak the sort of a global language, like, I guess, which we're trying to create and find the nuance around within the space. Because, if we think about, we live in a global north space, but like in Asia, I'm the majority, right? So this idea that like non-white people are the minority within a global world is not true. And so we're trying to create a network that speaks to and allows for these spaces for people all over the world, these non-white people all over the world within the food industry, wherever that sits. And the language around that does often get co-opted, as Zoe was saying, about things like authenticity and the use of her blackness for a moment that suits a white media or audience. And so being able to be in a space that Black Book creates, and the talks that we've had, and we're just at the end, the last week of Black History Month, which we've been running weekly talks for this month in the UK. Within those spaces, when it is just entirely people of color, or with this month, it's been Black, predominantly British people within the food world. The nuances and the complications around food can be discussed in a much more interesting way, or sort of unpicked a lot more. One of the biggest things that I hadn't realized, because I'm not a chef, but came up time and time again, is this idea during the 8-week decolonizing the food industry talks, was around structure. So you have recipe books or recipes in newspapers, and the structure around writing a recipe for these spaces are super short, because we're reliant on, or we're used to, very specific language for the white chef and the white audience, and using those spaces in that kind of structure. And of course, if you have to explain an ingredient that has cultural history, or a dish that has cultural specific reference points, you need a little bit more space. And so those structures within these media spaces don't only suit white recipes, because we've been working within a white space. So this idea of the white gaze and the white lens was one of the biggest things that came out of these talks, and that is about language and how we understand that. So by building, so then the other point that Zoe brought up as well quite a few times is this idea of building our own spaces, because we can't wait for the current white-led spaces to change, to allow us in, to allow these structures to change, to allow us to tell the stories that we want to tell. So by building Black Book, we get to create a narrative, or sort of like a multiplicity of narrative and language and stories that allow for the non-white food stories to happen. And so with that comes a sense of ownership, the way you get to use language and talk about language, and trying to sit outside of a box that we constantly get put in. So of course, I come from a journalist background, and so I'm within Black Book, loosely heading up content. At the moment, we're all just kind of doing as much work as we can to get it off the ground, but that's how it will sort of lead. And one of the things that I have really noticed in my career is that if I want to pitch stories, or if I want to tell stories, that don't sit within this white gaze, it can be incredibly difficult. And, you know, just to bounce off the idea of what Zoe has experienced is this, you know, fitting it into a particular way of talking and a particular topics that make other people, that make white people predominantly feel comfortable. And so the visibility part of our pillars, I guess, is about allowing more of those stories to be seen, and bringing those stories kind of to the forefront, but absolutely on our terms, or the terms of whose stories they are. So Black Book is there to facilitate people to tell the stories in the way that they want to tell them, with the language that they want to use, and trying to find those kind of spaces and nuances around that. One of the things that came up that and this is something I guess because I found particularly interesting because of my career, but is this idea of trusting the audience as well. So not only are we trying to tell stories and use language that works for the people we want to support, the kind of Black and non-white people in the food world, but we also really actually understand that the audience of food, even in the global north, is not just white. And so it's been able to trust the audience. So editors and journalists and writers need to be able to trust that the audience do actually want different stories and are actually like game to experience things that they don't know, or they haven't seen before, or ways of telling stories that they hadn't realized existed. And if we see that, like the publishing, what publishing paid me, really kind of unpicked that topic of sort of what can be successful and what isn't successful, but also did really bring up the idea of audience. And you know, like we've got a great audience here of people who are obviously interested in this topic, who are, you know, well, actually, the only people I can see are white, so making a broad statement here. But therefore, you know, people are interested in other stories. So trusting your audience was probably the biggest thing that stuck with me across those ideas. And also with language and narrative and this idea of, you know, visibility that we're trying to develop through Black Book is the space of education, which. So we've just, as Zoe's also talked about, this sort of mentorship fund. And education, of course, though, so we're offering the education and support for people in the industry to come up and give them assistance as and how, and be the conduits to get the information and the work that they need. But also we found that we're offering an education to people in the industry, to like the kind of white you know, gatekeepers of the industry, and we've had some really lovely feedback and interaction from those people, and that's, I guess, one of the things that we would like to develop and you know, nurture and bring in some of the kind of allyship around that. But you know, that is an education piece that we're hoping to do and get funded and you know, do properly. And this is again what the giving space to these conversations, you know, taking 8 weeks to really look into these topics, and then taking this month of October to highlight, discuss, and look at, and you know, and take away from the ideas of trends and things. Yeah, I think it's and we've only really just started. So one of the things I think it's also really important to understand is that we're like figuring out some of the language, some of the structures, what works best, and how that is, and having the space for allowing for this content is really important, so that it can be kind of nuanced around that. Yeah, Zoe, I mean, do you have anything else along those lines?
Bravo. No, I think just to add that, you know, we were interviewed recently. I tend to pull back from such types of interviews. That's who I am. But we were interviewed recently by a publication, and one of the questions they asked us was, and bear in mind, we haven't actually officially launched. Everybody keeps saying launched in. We never launched. We did a Decolonizing the Food Industry webinar as a pre-launch activity, and we did it under the brand of Back Book because, you know, everything that was happening was the heartbeat of what Black Book wanted to talk about, discuss. But we never officially launched anything other than a web series. But, you know, as usual, the media and the narrative gets spun around you. It's like, oh, they've launched this and this is that. And suddenly they're trying to put pressure on you to have achieved something, right? So one of these questions was, you launched in June. What have been your early successes so far? And it's like, hang on a minute. We didn't launch in June. We did a web series, and there's a pandemic around the world, and we are 3 non-white women in food who've just started tinkering with the idea of trying to create a platform. But it really speaks to what the media is like in the UK. It's like, why haven't you done more? What's your, you know what I mean? It's like, hang on, the fact that we exist is our success. The fact that we held that series and got the audience and got the participants during a pandemic, and the fact that we were frankly the best thing on the internet happening during that moment in terms of the content we were providing around that topic, these topics. It's like, that's enough. Why do you need us to have succeeded somewhere else, you know? And it's so in part, you know, we have to navigate we still have to deal with this gaze, we still have to deal with all of this crap, right?
Actually, that's a really good...
There's a lot for us to still unpick and even unlearn ourselves. And we're not saying that we have all of the answers. We're suggesting where some of the answers might come from. And it's not going to come from an all-white leadership or publishers or a culinary school. That's never where the answer is going to come from, only the problem. So, you know, I think that's really important to bear in mind, that we are a fledgling company. We haven't even formed the company's house, you know. We're working, we all have other projects. We're putting our heart and soul into this. And it's a huge vision and it's a huge idea with huge, you know, goals in mind, but we're very much at the beginning of the journey, you know. So we're partnering. And, you know, just to come back to this idea of us being a conduit, it's like, we're not trying to also be the best at anything or, you know.
Or the first. Or the
first. Yeah, it's like, you know, we've been created because there is a problem that needs to be solved, and we're in the process of finding the answers, and that is an ongoing, almost probably life's work. You know, there is no end point to this. It doesn't end in March. It doesn't end in March 22. It's not going to end when the pandemic's over. You know what I mean? It's like, this is just work ongoing.
And actually, on that note, like, one of the things that Frankie said right at the beginning of this, as sort of a side thing in one of our meetings, she said, I'm seeing this so that my children or grandchildren live in a more equal world. Like, we understand this as work that, as you say, like, as Zoe said, is a lifetime work. It's not going to be solved. Like, this equality and wealth creation, like decolonizing, is not going to happen in our career span or lifetime. You know, we understand that the achievements of this is beyond that. Yeah.
It's like building the pyramids, you know. You might be the guy that was involved in putting the first layer down, but you're certainly going to have been around when the top went on. So you're helping to build something that you don't even know what it's going to look like, you know, in the future, but you're laying the foundations in the hope, you know, that it will look something like what you want it to be, or better, you know. So, yeah.
And thinking about language, actually, and thinking about what you said about the interviews, that's a really good point, Zoe, about the because we've had all these interviews that we sort of weren't thinking about because we had launch. But people were curious and interested, and that's like super great. But also, one of the things that people have asked is, so how do you decolonize the food industry? Like, as if it's 3 points or 3 things, or that's what we've solved. We started a conversation in summer with 8 weeks, like, and also it can feel quite difficult to be asked these questions when it's also been something you've been trying to work at and do for a decade. So you've been working and thinking and trying to, and then someone just says, tell me your answers, tell me your thoughts now. Like, I need it now. As opposed to wanting to have a discussion. And that's kind of the tension point that that we're at. So it's great that people are now interested and they know this word decolonizing, but it can be quite a difficult thing to answer. And I think I have lost my patience sometimes in these questions. Luckily, Frankie is very good at editing those down.
She doesn't edit my answers.
Well, she took out some swear words that I'd put in, so she had edited mine down.
I go out raw. But we want to foster community, we want to foster conversation. We just want honest, open and frank conversation, really, is the main thing we want, an inclusive conversation. And we don't want people to just sit back, watch and wait for answers, because that's just another version of racism. We're not going to serve you the answers on a plate because we can't, but we can help you get there in a specific bespoke situation. So the clients that come to us, every business, every person comes with their own stuff, whether it's, their own, in terms of a client we might have, let's say a media organization that is known for producing recipe content online might come to us and say, look, we love the series, we were really listening, and, we're thinking about looking at our house style guide. Could that be something you could help us with so that we can make space for writers of colour or black and non-white people to feel comfortable writing recipes for us? And it's like, yeah, great, let's have that conversation, let's do that work. That's a piece of consultancy, which means we get paid, but you get all of our experience, and you get all of our what's the word, de facto, or what I mean, by osmosis, you get the experience of everybody who's in our network, who are continually talking to us, who are continually feeding back to us, whether it's being performed on a Zoom or not. We're always having these conversations. So we're constantly fueled, and we're happy to share the answers in the right context. Just don't expect us to lay down a Bible of here's what you need to do. It's like, I'm not Layla Saad, I haven't written white supremacy yet, or the food version of it. So, when we have a book to sell for you to read, please buy it. In the meantime, join us in the conversation. If you really want to make progress, please do, And the same way with our clients. All of our clients won't be the same, Some people will be suffering extreme hardship right now and they just need money to get to work. Some people will need help with designing a marketing strategy. Other people will be a bit further on in their career and maybe want to pivot to TV or, whatever it is. Every client comes with their own agenda and purpose and things like that. And they'll have their individual sort of personal growth and self-development things that they need to work on also. Because mindset, frankly, is one of the biggest challenges in preparing people to work in this industry for me. And what's most dear to my heart is, preparing people mentally and emotionally for the journey they're about to take. So, there isn't one answer. There never has been and there never will be. So it is about continuing the conversation, building alliances, building relationships, and supporting other platforms and working with other platforms, which is what we are doing and what we intend to keep doing going forward, because there are great organisations that already exist that do some of this work that we want to do. And why would we undermine that? We certainly wouldn't. So if people are doing, the work and they're doing great work, then we'll be a conduit for them, Maybe.
So speaking of conversations, I think now is also a good for everybody. So thank you first of all, Zoe and Anna. Thank you so much again. I'm really happy we have this opportunity to get to know you a bit more. And yeah, if you have any questions, everybody who's here on the call, just shoot. You can either write them in the chat or turn on your microphone, turn on your video and ask them directly. I'm already seeing one by Ursula, actually. Afterwards, I have a few, but Ursula, if you want to ask it directly, feel free, or I can just read it out.
Should I read this out? I can see this gets me thinking as a food writer. Thank you. Thank you. Could you give us an example of a kind of before after recipe. Okay, I've got an example for you. So right in the middle of this, in fact, right back at the start of the Decolonizing webinar series, I'm not going to name the paper. It's really hard not to, but yeah, a well-known broadsheet weekend respected publication that has its food supplement or whatever. And they had been in contact with me saying how they wanted to change how they do their food section. They want more representation, da, 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 da. Can't believe we haven't had you in the magazine since 2017. Really? I can really believe it. But okay. Anyway, so I went through the performance, I did the dance with them. I felt like that they meant what they were saying. And they instituted some of those changes and have continued to do so, in terms of, we now do see more black faces in that publication because they have created more literal physical space to have that happen. However, the first, so they asked me to submit some recipes, which of course I did. And I'd written a very long introduction, a couple of paragraphs, anecdotal, so talking about, because here's the thing, right? When I write a recipe of Ghanaian food, I can't have the 50-word limit, which is the headstand usually, because nobody, if the recipe is a traditional recipe, I have to give a context of me and who I am. This is my responsibility, by the way, as a writer. People need to understand who I am, what I'm bringing to this recipe, how I found it, how I'm translating it, and why, right? That is a piece of narrative you cannot fit into 50 words. So I'd written this, two or three paragraph introduction to it, telling people about the history of the dish, why I've done this with it, and, blah. And they said to me, oh, we can't have all of that in the print version, but we'll include it online. And it came out so the edition came out during the webinar series we were having on this topic the same day. And I looked online and they hadn't included the full version. So, whether that was forgetfulness or just barefaced lying to me, I don't know. But the problem is they contradicted themselves on a piece that was kind of crucial for me because of the whole navigating the thing that they were contacting me as a black chef to have black recipes in their thing to make them look like they were doing the thing they said they were doing, right? So it's like it's given with one hand and it's taken right away with the other. So that's not how you do things. By contrast, I submitted virtually the same recipe with some minor tweaks to an American publication, and they were like, love the story behind this. Love, that was it. Love the story behind this. The end. There's no like, oh, can you cut it down to 50 words? Can you da 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 da? It's like, so you got, on one hand, be as authentic as you can while replacing all the ingredients that are actually Ghanaian, and don't tell us anything about the dish, where it's from, why you're writing about it, and how you've changed it to give it. Because I consider all of those things, and any food writer that I've known and have met who isn't white consider all of those things important to tell, because we care about the story, we care about where this stuff comes from and how it's translated to people. Because, if I put a recipe up for Otto and it looks completely different from what a Ghanaian understands to be Otto in Ghana, I need to explain that, and therefore I need the space to do it. I hope that answers the question.
I'll just add in my 2 cents worth of that, and like as a writer's perspective, is that if you don't give the contextualization, then the dish or the ingredients or the story gets exoticized. It becomes other, and it becomes this kind of like, it takes away the humanity from the people who cook that dish, from the person who created that recipe. So it's really important to not exoticize, which is why you need the context. And as whoever's writing and creating, like Zoe, that, and that you don't want to other,
And also, just to add, otherwise it doesn't make me, this whole fuss that happened on the internet, or in fact, every time Jamie Oliver tries to cook outside of Italy or Britain, you know, we had Jollof-gate, we had Paella-gate. Like every time he messes around with another national dish from a different country, it's like people are angry because there isn't that context. It's like, who's this white guy changing entirely the way that this food looks, what the ingredients are, and then calling it our thing? It's like, why does he have license to do that? Now, I personally believe that all chefs and all cooks should extrapolate, should have fun, should be creative. But the point is there is this responsibility that most white chefs do not have, and the industry doesn't force upon them, to give this heritage, to give this information. It's like, this is how it normally is, but I'm going to do it like this today. And here's why I'm doing it like this. Maybe I can't get that ingredient, so I'm going to use this instead. And it should be like almost the reverse of what we've been forced to do, which is give white ingredients for essentially black food. But do you know what I mean? So, you know, I feel very strongly that my responsibility to not misrepresent my cuisine or where it comes from. And I think that all chefs should, really.
We also have a question from Alejandro, who's also turned on his video. Over to you.
He's on mute. Oh,
now is sound?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, I really love what you're doing. It's really great. And I get first attention of this topic or issue with the guys of Ghetto Gastro from the Bronx, from New York. And I just want to ask if you are like connected with them, or are there for you also like the pioneers of this topic, and you try to co-work like to spread your message on a bigger way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know Ghetto Gastro personally. I am fans of that brand and what they've done with it. And you're not the first person recently to tell me that we should work with them, actually. It's come up in a lot of my conversations, especially while I'm in New York. But I know they're very busy as well, you know. But yeah, you're right. We should link up. They're a fantastic outfit. They do great work. They're fun as well. And this is the other thing. It's like, none of this has to be... What we're trying to do is... we're really trying to avoid within any existing molds. Do you know what I mean? We're trying to completely break of all of this bullshit, for want of a better word. You know, it's like whatever the existing structures are, they haven't worked for us. You know, whatever the traditional models are, they haven't worked for us. So why would we lean on them? Why would we slide into them? Why would we use them? So, you know, and that's why we're very much seeking this collaborative approach and like not seeking ownership of anything, because nobody can, do you know what I mean? And the work gets done faster the more we collaborate, honestly, and because just, you know, exactly as you've said, because you reach more people faster, and then you get traction, and then you get a movement, and you get momentum, and then you've got a new condition, you know, a new way of being in the world.
As we mentioned, you know, like being conduits is really the key to what we want to do, which is, and we're also, the only reason we're here is because of the work that people have done before us. You know, the only reason, like, I know how to talk about decolonizing the food system is because I've done, you know, 10 years in academia leading people already and working on this already. And, you know, like, so we're very aware that there are people around us, before us, in front of us, etc. And that's how we want to, and we know a lot of these people, work with a lot of these people, so for sure.
Cool.
And I just want to say thank you to you, Alejandro. Thanks for saying thanks, mate. Cheers.
I also have a question which kind of dips into that too. Can you hear me? Yeah. Because I feel like there's a lot of resources and on that from the US, and most of the things that I read to educate myself on is things from the US, but I always struggle to apply that to the European context, or like to the German Berlin context. Maybe it would be great if we always try to do a little resource list after these talks, but what are the, besides the Black Book, of course, but what are the are there more projects in the EU or in the UK or in Germany that you know of that are doing work that you think are mentionable, and how can you compare the US with our food system here? Is it the same? What are the differences? You know, does that make sense?
And that's a huge question. So I'm interested, actually. Let me throw a question back to you. I'm interested to understand what you think about the conversation in America doesn't translate.
Can you rephrase it a little bit?
So, if and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard you say that most of your research has been based on a US narrative around the topic, and that you found it difficult to apply that discussion or those findings or examples to a European model. And I'm interested to understand why that is. What specifically about that was a challenge in translation?
Well, it's not a challenge in translation. I just feel like there's way more there's more talking about it in the US that I haven't seen here at all, at least not in Germany. And I think I find it difficult to apply I mean, I just don't have a connection with the US history. You know what I mean? Like I just probably don't understand it, and I can't, for myself, I can't, I'm just wondering, I can't connect with it maybe, and I don't understand it in the US as much as I do for here.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, what I would say is there's lots of correlation. Let's go with
Coralie is a name, I think.
There's a lot of correlation, I think, between the African American experience and the Black British experience, because, you know, once the British Empire neatly disposed of slavery, you know, colonialism didn't stop. Like in fact, colonialism only just got started, really. Do you know what I mean? And if you look at what happened to the States with like the slave trade and stuff, there it's like, you know, for me, I see lots of parallels. But anyway, I understand your question. So let's go first with organizations. Okay, so we have, for example, I won't be able to name all of them now, but I'm sure we could share them post. But BAME in Hospitality, for example, is a platform that's been created specifically to give a mentoring network to Black people working in hospitality in the UK. You have platforms like Equal Measures have been set up, who are trying to do sort of similar work to us, actually, but through a specific lens of the drinks part of the industry, as I understand it. I could be wrong. There's a never-ending list of like
People as well.
Diversity and, you know, people engage with diversity, but specifically like on this topic of decolonization, I'm pretty sure that in the UK, I mean, I haven't seen any other organization specifically centered with decolonization at the heart of it as the kicking off, that sort of the bridge, you know what I mean? But there are certainly lots and lots and lots of platforms, new and old, right, that exist to create diversity and inclusion and things like that, but they're not necessarily focused on concepts such as equity, giving people equity in their IP, giving people equity in terms of wealth creation, in terms of advocating for equal pay for equal work, you know, which all of us, my experience and many of my peers, our experience has been that we're drastically underpaid compared to our, you know, white peers. And so, you know, I think we have specifically chosen areas that other people haven't worked on, but in the broader sense of things, there's a lot of resource out there for sure. Go on, sorry.
So on the kind of topic of why America versus Europe, there's a historical basis, which is colonialism, in the sense that, and I'm going to talk specifically about the UK, but this does reference a lot of Europe as well, is that like slavery and colonialism and all the kind of the violent histories that these countries enacted happened elsewhere, whereas in America it happened on the grounds of the American ground. You know, that so America has to deal with quite literally spaces of violence, indigenous or black spaces of violence, and because it is a land mass of that was, although it's different states, it was sort of developed in the same way at the same time with similar structures of violence to build this empire. It has kind of a mass about it, whereas in Europe you've got smaller countries which have had their own very specific empire and national identity building. And that national identity building has been based on violence elsewhere, right? I mean, even in the UK, the First and Second World War happened predominantly elsewhere, right? So we don't have to, in the UK, we don't have to face literal spaces of violence on a really regular basis. And so that means that conversations don't get sort of forced up into narratives quicker and easier, and so those spaces aren't there. And basically, if you want to, like there is some really good writing from Black German academics and like, you know, accessible academics and writers. You really have to search for them, but also it does mean that you have to open up the spaces for those people. Which I think America has dealt with better. My theory being it has to, like, the level of violence that happened in that space is, you know.
Right. And also, you know, a civil rights movement that's ongoing. But what was it I wanted to say about, you know, it might also be that, you know, Germany doesn't have the same kind of Black population, or I mean, actually, maybe that's not true. You know, there has been a lot of, since the European Union and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, outside of Berlin, I personally haven't seen very huge population densities of Black and non-white people. So I think maybe that has something to do with it, because obviously there is a vast population in the United States that is African American. There is a decent part of the population in the UK who are Black British or immigrants from colonial countries. So in some ways, we in the UK, we have a really good and really bad relationship with colonialism, because we're super aware of it, because that's what we're taught about in history. Aren't we great because we're British? And then you realise, hang on, I'm Black though, so what does that mean? You know what I mean? So we are forced, even from school, to have a more intellectual relationship with history and identity and colonisation. Not that it's given to us through the curriculum, but, you know, a curious mind would obviously question some of the stuff you read about and learn about if you're not the person who won that war. So, yeah, I think there's a specific relationship between the UK and colonialism, because Britain's still proud of it. You know, the colonies still exist. It hasn't gone away, and they wanted to keep defending that. It's a very specific kind of relationship in the UK, but whereas in the States, there has been this mass movement around the broader spectrum of civil rights. So that it's always been in conversation, kind of, you know, and there's just more capacity in the US to have that conversation, because, as Anna said, it's so present every day. The problems of it are so present every day and are particularly increasingly more violent. And so harder to ignore. That said, you know, the UK has increasing levels of police violence against Black people and non-white people also, but I'm trying to stick to the concept of food here. Sorry for going off on a tangent, but yeah, I think that's got something to do with it, like just population density in the first place, and then having whatever specific relationship that country has with its former colonies, and then America is kind of its own thing. But that said, we still know that the experience in food is the same wherever we are, because it's always white people in power, wherever you go, you know?
Yeah, also if I can add something, I think it also has a lot to do with what was like the colonial approach. I know that France was very into assimilation, and that had a lasting impact on like the identity of everybody descending from that. Whereas I think UK was more about appropriation, but leaving the colonies keep their identities a bit more. So I guess it's really, really different. And Germany is also different. So yeah, I guess it's what you said. In Europe, it's a lot more dependent on individual countries.
Yeah, I mean, it's a national, like it's nationalism. Colonialism is a kind of nationalism and empire building. Ursula also says here about in Germany starting a conversation around Vietnamese and Turkish communities. I mean, I would say it's not literally colonialism related. I would say the Vietnamese conversation is probably still colonial because of the connection with France, even though German communities might be slightly different, and also that would become, and that's also those I guess those communities are also a lot of refugee communities or escaping war and that, so that would be another complicated thing, but also could probably tie into ideas around colonialism as well. But yeah, it's
also, let's not forget, like, you know, decolonizing as a word is kind of like this really, it's a very big idea and it's a very broad kind of, but so many other things fit into that. I mean, it's culinary appropriation, cultural appropriation, you know, all of those other things that go on in food are part of that, you know, they're part of colonization, and they are things we need to unpick, and that is part of decolonizing, you know?
Yeah, colonization is not just like taking over someone's country. It's like taking over thoughts and dominating and creating a one lens of looking at something.
Yeah, it's the culture, really, which I spoke about actually in the last talk. It's the culture. The food industry's culture is inherently colonialist. Therefore, everything that's happening in food, pretty much, unless it's like black-owned farming on black-owned, you know, if that's not happening, then there's colonization happening, probably. You know what I mean?
I have another question, and I know they're really broad. I'm sorry about that. But I'm also just recently reading about all of this, and the things that I read lately was about, because, you know, like in our community, we talk a lot about products and we talk a lot about agriculture and like to give, more validation to the products and the people behind it and right? And now reading about the like different kind of products, I find it really, like it was in Germany, you said like the tomatoes from the eyes, that like we talk about certain products, but then we never question, for example, like spices or cinnamon or colonized products, if I can call them like that, where they come from. That's like that's never the conversation. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I thought that was really like an imploding brain for me. Being someone in the industry that talks about this the whole time and things that, you know.
I mean, that is a huge question, and I'm like writing a book about it. But like, so for example,
Okay.
for example, pepper. So my family grow pepper, black pepper, which is ubiquitous, right? Like everyone has black pepper on the table, dinner table. You know, salt and pepper, and so black pepper can only be grown in tropical places. So that, and if you look into pepper, there's so many different hierarchies to it, etc., etc. The pepper that my family grow is up in Borneo, up in the kind of highlands, and like right in the interior, and so people think, oh, that's super exciting, right? Like great pepper, it's incredible pepper. It's quite expensive over here, and obviously the farmers don't get that necessarily back there, but people think about, they don't look at the whole context of that sourcing line. So one of the parts of that sourcing line is like trying to make sure that that's equitable, and no one sits there and questions where their pepper's from. You know, I'm not going to go into it because it's too long, but like just asking those very, very simple questions and knowing it is yeah, you're right, it doesn't get asked, and it's huge. I mean, Zoe's got a whole business that it relates to. sourcing spices equitably.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to bore everybody with that because I talked about it for an hour last week pretty much. But what I did want to say, though, is I just wrote something for, I don't know if I can say what the publication, I just wrote something about something. Anyway, and in it, I mentioned this idea of, you know, this hostility towards migrants and xenophobia and all of that, and the, you know, the language of food and its, you know, healing potential, blah, blah, blah. But also the point is like, try to imagine, even in Germany, like in the UK, I don't think any household would manage without curry powder, without cinnamon, without waxed lemons, without, you know, really basic bananas. You know, so many ingredients have come through the immigrant process, the immigrant story, in terms of cuisine. So many cuisines have come to Britain and Europe through the immigrant story, right? But also, so many ingredients have come through colonization, and people don't even think about that at all. And you're right. It's like this. You know, this is exactly it. It's getting the consumer, which is the real end goal, getting the consumer to make educated and informed choices about, hang on, that's a good point. Were the people that grew this, like, where are they? And are they getting paid properly? And like, why am I paying such an expensive price for something in the country of origin only is, you know, pittance? So where's the profit in that, and where is it going, you know? And yes, through my own Anna Kitchen website, that's something I'm personally trying to deal with, is making sure that I only deal directly with farms, small farms and farm holders, so that I know that they're getting, the money goes back to the farm and the people, and there's not like loads of marketing money and white people money in the middle for tiering in that, you know, in that relationship. And asking my customers to think about that, to think about where your ingredients come from, and not just that, but also buying, if you can, from the people that really produce it, and not from the big multinationals who have co-opted it to make money off the backs of that hard work, you know. So yeah, just, it's an ongoing, like, all of these things are, this is the work, this is it, is having these, raising these issues, having these conversations, and getting people to understand that these are big concerns. It's not actually, it's not no big deal. It's as much of a deal as climate change is, right? If you're worrying about how many times a day you flush the toilet, if you're worrying about whether you're using the right brand of soap detergent and things like that, then you should also be concerned with where your spices come from, you know? And also, frankly, it's like, I wonder if I should buy from this white-owned, white chef Vietnamese restaurant, or whether I should actually go to a Vietnamese restaurant with, you know what I mean? Like, these are consumer-led choices that need to, and I'm not advocating one or the other. I'm just saying that the customer needs to be informed enough about the broader issues to understand why that choice is important.
There was also a piece by Yohan Komolafe on palm oil that I found really interesting, which also kind of, opened my eyes on a lot of things. We're going to put that in the recommendations also, definitely.
Yohanda's a good friend of mine.
We are almost running out of time. Sorry?
Yohanda's a good friend of mine. She actually asked me to contribute to that article, but I was busy. But yeah, I completely agree with her about palm oil. And the whole point on palm oil is, because we've been in conversation together on this topic for years and years and years. And it's like, why do white people want to tell African people what ingredients they can use? Because white industry and a white consumer have greedily and, you know, disproportionately with negative effects in terms of sustainability and the choices of how they have farmed, you know. So white choices around black food and telling then black people, no, you shouldn't eat that, it's bad, because, you know, it's like, no, it's none of your business. Don't tell us what to do. We were farming this in a perfectly legitimate, fine way. It's actually white industry that needs to look at their use of palm oil, not us, you know? We're not creating deforestation. We're not doing that. It's you lot.
Yeah, I mean, palm oil is something that I get really irritated about, because I've been on independent palm oil farms by, you know, in Sarawak, where they're like very small, just run by the family, just used for locals, you know, and they've been doing this for a long time, and that is not anti-sustainability or an effect on the environment, you know. Yeah. Anyway,
And that's a piece of education, because the whole saviour complex is like, oh God, palm oil's terrible. I've just found out that palm oil is in like toilet tissue. It's like, oh my God. It's like, okay, white guys, why don't you like slow your roll, do some actual research on the whole bit, yeah, and attack the people you need to attack. I mean, I agree. Yeah, there is a cause to take up against big white, food technology companies who are doing that, but don't blanket palm oil as an ingredient because you've discovered there's a problem with how it's produced in a certain part of a certain country,
So I think we have time for one last question. Alejandro, if you want to...
I just want to do a short comment on this topic because like I hate that much. And for me, the biggest problem is that people now like they appropriate products and spices. For us as white people, it's normal to have quinoa nowadays in every supermarket, and we don't know the background. Or the best example is for me, coffee. Every household is full of coffee and everybody drinks so much fucking coffee and they don't know how cheap they buy it and where it's produced and nothing. And yeah, we appropriate it like modern product colonization, I think. Yeah, on that topic, just a little comment and a short question, like looking into the future, what do you think, or do you look bright to the future, or do you have a strict plan for next project to change something?
I feel optimistic about what we can do, and I mean we in the widest sense of, by we I mean the people who are interested to affect change. I'm optimistic about what we can do if there's enough of us, which there seems to be a growing number. I'm optimistic about that. I'm optimistic about what new platforms look like, what new models look like. I feel all of that is really exciting. I'm not holding my breath for the existing platforms and networks and institutions to change very quickly, but hopefully they do, but whatever, really. So I'm optimistic about what's possible outside of existing structures, because that's exciting. And we have a real opportunity to build something unimaginably beautiful.
I agree. I feel really optimistic. I think more people are wanting to engage. I think that what we can do, specifically even just at Black Book, is going to be really exciting. And next year, we've got when we've got time and space to which we'll have, what we're going to do next year is going to be, it's going to be pretty cool. So I'm excited.
You also mentioned briefly the Black Book Academy, which I'm super exciting. But we're running out of time, so I think we're going to have to leave it here. Thank you so much, Zoe and Anna. Thank you so much for taking the time today and also 2 weeks ago to speak to us and for us to get to know you a bit better. We hope we can continue this Symposium this week. We have 2 more talks. One is in exactly 15 minutes, more or less, at 7:30. Which is why we really need to wrap it up, with Alicia Kennedy, who's a food writer from the US, who's also going to share some thoughts on similar questions and the relationship between media, chefs, and consumers. Her talk is called The Potential of Catastrophe, How New Narratives in Media and Kitchens Can Transform the Food System. And then tomorrow at 7:30, we're going to be talking about regenerative agriculture with Richard Perkins, who is a pioneer in this field, and also Benedikt Bösel, a farmer who is also part of Die Gemeinschaft, actually. So we hope to see you there, and thank you, Zoe, for sending that link. I will definitely include it in the reading list. And I see the conversation is continuing in the chat. Thank you so much. So yeah, if you want to keep talking, you can also use our Slack channel, which is called Stammtisch. You can find the link to register on our website or in the emails regarding the symposium. You will find it everywhere. And yeah, I'm very happy that we got to talk to you. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye,
Cheers.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.